I still remember the exact moment my life changed forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, wearing the most beautiful white dress I had ever seen in my life. My mother was behind me, crying softly, fixing the small pearl buttons on my back. My sister was taking photos. The room smelled like roses and hairspray and everything that felt like hope. I was 27 years old, and I was about to marry the man of my dreams. His name was Daniel, and God, was he everything. Tall, dark-eyed, with a jawline that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had this way of walking into a room, slow, confident, like he already owned it, which, honestly, he usually did. Daniel was wealthy. Not just comfortable wealthy. Not just nice car wealthy. I mean the kind of wealthy that makes ordinary people nervous. Private jets. A penthouse in the city. A vacation home in the mountains that he used maybe 3 times a year. He wore watches that cost more than most people's cars, and he wore them like they meant nothing. We had met 18 months earlier at a charity gala, the kind of event I wouldn't normally attend. But my friend Saba had dragged me along because she'd gotten us both invitations through her boss. I remember not even wanting to go that night. I remember thinking my shoes were uncomfortable and the room was too loud, and I'd rather be at home watching a movie. And then he walked over to me, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, not wine, which I noticed, and he said, "You look like someone who doesn't want to be here either." I laughed, actually laughed, because he was right. We talked for 4 hours that night, just the two of us, standing near the tall glass windows while the city glittered below us. He told me he was in real estate and international investments. He told me he had built his company from nothing, starting in his mid-20s with one small property deal that somehow turned into an empire. He was 34, self-made, and brilliant. He asked me about myself with this genuine curiosity that I wasn't used to. Most men at events like that talked to you. Daniel listened. He leaned in. He remembered the details. I was a school teacher, a primary school teacher. I taught 8-year-olds how to read and add numbers and believe in themselves. I didn't have money. I didn't have a fancy apartment or a designer wardrobe. I had a small flat, a used car, and a mother who prayed for me every night. And somehow, that seemed to matter to him more than anything else. He called me the next day. We went for coffee, then dinner, then long drives at night where we'd talk until 2 in the morning about life and faith and what we both wanted from the future. Within 6 months, he had met my parents. Within a year, he had proposed, simply, quietly, at the same spot by those tall glass windows where we first spoke. No grand gesture, no billboard, no crowd. Just him and me and a small diamond ring that he said had belonged to his grandmother. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. My family was overjoyed. My father, who had worked hard his whole life to give us a modest but loving home, shook Daniel's hand with tears in his eyes. My mother started planning the wedding immediately. Everyone around me said the same thing. "You are so lucky. He is a perfect manual." And I believed them. Completely. Wholeheartedly. With every cell in my body. Because in those 18 months of courtship, Daniel had been exactly that: perfect, patient, generous, respectful. He never pressured me. He supported my work, even attended my school's parent events and sat in tiny plastic chairs without complaining. He brought food to my parents' house without being asked. He prayed. He fasted. He spoke softly and chose his words carefully. I thought I had done what most women only dream of. I thought I had found a good man and a secure future all in one. The wedding was grand. 400 guests. A banquet hall that looked like something from a magazine. My dress was custom made. His suit was imported. There were flowers everywhere, white and gold and blush pink. People took videos and uploaded them online, and the comments were full of words like goals and blessed and so beautiful. I danced with him that night like the world didn't exist outside of us. We flew to Europe for our honeymoon, Paris, then Florence, then a private villa on the Amalfi Coast. Every morning I woke up next to him and felt like my life had become something I once only imagined. I would look at him sleeping and think, This is real. This is mine. We came back home and moved into his penthouse together. I kept teaching because I loved it, and he respected that. Life was warm and quiet and full. For 7 months, I was the happiest woman alive. And then one evening in November, I came home early from school because the children had a half day. The apartment was supposed to be empty. Daniel was supposed to be in a business meeting across the city. But as I stepped out of the elevator and walked toward our front door, I heard voices inside, low, urgent, tense. Not the television. Not a call on speaker. Real voices. Multiple men. Speaking fast. In a language I didn't fully understand. Throwing around words I didn't recognize. I pressed my hand against the door, and through the thin gap where the frame didn't quite close, I saw something that made my heart stop completely. There were 4 men in my living room, and spread across my dining table, the table where I ate breakfast every morning, were stacks of cash so large they nearly touched the ceiling. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 2 minutes. Time does something strange to you when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing. It just stops. Like a clock that's been dropped. My hand was still flat against the door. My school bag was still on my shoulder. I was still wearing my coat, still holding my keys in my other hand. The little keychain my students had gifted me for Teacher's Day, a small painted heart with my name on it. I remember feeling it dig into my palm as I gripped it tighter and tighter without even realizing. The men inside were speaking in a mix of Urdu and something else, something clipped and fast that I couldn't place. One of them was on the phone, pacing near the window. Another was counting the cash with bare hands, moving quickly, efficiently, like he had done this 1,000 times before. A third man was writing something in a notebook, small, hurried handwriting. Nothing I could read from where I stood. And Daniel, my husband, the man I had married 7 months ago under the lights and the flowers and the prayers of everyone who loved us. He was standing at the head of the table, arms crossed, watching everything with this expression I had never seen on his face before. Not warmth, not kindness, not the gentle patience I had fallen in love with. This was control. Cold, quiet, total control. He said something short and sharp, and all 3 men immediately adjusted what they were doing, like soldiers responding to a command. No hesitation. No questions. I stepped back from the door. My foot caught the edge of the hallway rug, and I stumbled slightly, and the keys in my hand clinked together. Just barely, just a small sound. But in the silence of that corridor, it felt like a gunshot. Inside, I heard movement stop. I didn't think. I just moved. I walked quickly to the stairwell door at the end of the hall, pushed it open slowly so it wouldn't slam, and I stood inside it with my back against the cold concrete wall, breathing through my mouth, trying to make myself as small and silent as possible. I stood there for what felt like forever, and then I heard the front door of our apartment open. Footsteps in the hallway. One person, walking slowly, deliberately. I squeezed my eyes shut. The footsteps paused. Then, after a long, terrible moment, they turned and went back inside. The apartment door clicked shut. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved. Then I took the stairs all the way down, walked out of the building through the side exit, sat in my car in the parking garage, and I cried. Not loudly. Not the way you cry in movies. Just silently, with my forehead on the steering wheel, shaking. I told myself there was an explanation. This is what we do, isn't it? When something frightens us about a person we love, we immediately start building them a defense. We become their lawyer before they've even been accused. I told myself maybe it was something legal, a business transaction, a property deal involving cash, something I didn't understand because I wasn't from that world. I told myself rich people operated differently, that there were things about high-level business that normal people like me just didn't know. I told myself I had misread the room. I drove around the city for an hour. Then I came home as if nothing had happened. When I walked in, the apartment was spotless. The dining table was empty. The men were gone. Daniel was sitting on the sofa, jacket off, watching the news, a cup of tea in his hand, completely, perfectly, disturbingly normal. He looked up and smiled at me. "You're back early," he said. "A half day," I said. "The kids had a program." He nodded and went back to the television. I went to the kitchen and stood there gripping the counter, telling myself to breathe, to be normal, to say nothing until I understood more. I made myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly. That night at dinner, he was charming and funny, and he asked me about my students and refilled my plate without being asked. I laughed at something he said and hated myself for it. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Small things I had always overlooked suddenly had new meaning. The phone calls he took in the other room, always keeping his voice low, always locking the door. The trips he called business meetings that had no fixed schedule, no company name, no colleagues I had ever met in person. The men who sometimes picked him up late at night in dark cars, men who never came upstairs, never rang the bell, just sent a single text and waited at the curb. I started looking around the apartment more carefully. In his home office, a room he kept locked, to which I had never thought to ask for a key, I began to notice that the lock itself had been recently changed. Fresh scratches around the keyhole, new hardware that didn't match the rest of the door. I started going through his things when he was in the shower. Jacket pockets, the small drawer in his bedside table, the inside pocket of his gym bag. And one afternoon, while he was out and I was supposedly just tidying the bedroom, I found something tucked inside the lining of his suitcase in the back of the wardrobe. It was a phone. A second phone. Old model, prepaid, with no name on it. I pressed the power button. It turned on immediately, no passcode, and the screen lit up with a long thread of messages. My eyes went straight to the most recent one, and the name at the top of that message thread was not a business contact. It was a woman's name. Her name was Jennifer. Just Jennifer. No last name saved. No profile picture. Just that single name sitting at the top of the screen like a knife waiting to fall. My hands were already trembling as I opened the thread. I told myself, even in that moment, even with a secret phone in my hands, I told myself it could still be innocent. A colleague. A family friend. Someone he was helping through a difficult time. I was still defending him. Still. And then I read the messages. I won't repeat all of them. I can't. Even now, thinking about those words makes my chest feel like something is being wrung out of it. But I will tell you enough. They had been speaking for at least 8 months, which meant it had started before our wedding. The messages were not the kind you send to a colleague. They were intimate, detailed, full of things that belonged only to our marriage, except they were being given to someone else entirely. There were inside jokes I had never heard. There were plans made, restaurants, hotel names, dates that I cross-referenced in my head against nights when Daniel had told me he was traveling for work. Every single one matched. There was one message that I read 3 times because I couldn't believe it. It was from him, sent 4 days before our wedding. 4 days. And it said, "After this week, things will have to change between us. But you know you're the one I choose when I have a choice." I sat down on the bedroom floor. I didn't even realize I had sat down. My legs just gave out beneath me, and suddenly I was on the carpet, back against the bed, staring at that screen with tears running down my face so quietly it was almost peaceful. No sobs, no sounds, just tears, like my body had accepted the grief before my mind could even name it. He had married me while actively, knowingly, choosing someone else in his heart. I scrolled further back. The messages went on, hundreds of them. And somewhere in the middle, buried between the tenderness and the arrangements, I found something else. Something that made the heartbreak suddenly feel secondary. There was a message from Jennifer that said, "The shipment was delayed again. Your guys are getting nervous." And Daniel's reply, "Tell them to hold. The route changes after the new documentation comes through. Nobody moves until I say." Shipment. Route. Documentation. I stared at those words. This wasn't the language of real estate. This wasn't investment talk or property deals. I had spent weeks convincing myself that whatever I had seen on that dining table was some unusual but legal business transaction. I had worked so hard to build that story for myself. But this This was something else entirely. I scrolled further, faster now, my tears drying up and being replaced by something colder, something sharper. There were references to names I didn't recognize, names followed by amounts of money, enormous amounts. Numbers with so many zeros they stopped looking real. There were references to clearing the paperwork through the third party, to making sure the officials stay quiet, to moving the product before the end of the month. And then, in one message from 6 months ago, Jennifer had written, "What happens if she finds out about any of it?" Daniel's reply was 4 words. She won't. She's simple. Simple. That word hit me harder than anything else on that phone. Harder than the betrayal. Harder than the other woman. Harder than the criminal undertones I was only beginning to understand. That one word told me exactly what I was to him. Not a partner. Not even a secret he was afraid of. I was a convenient cover. A simple, uncomplicated woman who taught small children and came home on time and asked no difficult questions. I was his camouflage. A respectable wife from a good family. A school teacher. Modest, trustworthy, above suspicion. The kind of woman you put in your penthouse and take to family dinners so that nobody looks too closely at what you're doing behind closed doors. I had not been chosen for love. I had been selected for usefulness. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I smoothed the lining of the suitcase. I put it back in the wardrobe at the same angle. I walked to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Not because she looked different, but because she finally looked awake. I spent the next 3 days functioning on the outside while completely dismantling my world on the inside. I started quietly, carefully, doing things I had never imagined myself doing. I began taking photographs of the phone messages, of documents I found in his unlocked briefcase one morning, of a business ledger tucked beneath a false bottom in his office desk that I accessed when he accidentally left the key in his coat pocket. I didn't understand everything I photographed, but I photographed all of it. I also called my cousin Justin, who was a lawyer, and told him I needed to meet urgently, in person, not over the phone, and without mentioning it to anyone in the family. He heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. We met at a cafe near his office, and I sat across from him with my phone in my hands, and I showed him everything. I watched his face change as he read. When he looked up at me, his expression told me everything I already feared. "Brisley," he said quietly, "do you have any idea who your husband actually is?" And before I could answer, his own phone rang. It was Daniel, calling Justin directly. Time stopped. Justin and I both stared at his phone screen lying flat on the cafe table between us. Daniel's name glowing on the display like a warning light. Ringing once, twice, 3 times. Neither of us moved. On the 4th ring, Justin picked it up. I watched his face carefully, every flicker, every micro-expression, as he answered with a completely calm, the kind of casual greeting that sounded like nothing at all was happening. I could hear Daniel's voice through the phone, but not his words. His tone sounded relaxed, conversational. Justin laughed at something, then said he was just catching up with a client, then said he'd call back later. Hung up. We sat in silence for 3 full seconds. "How did he know you were with me?" I whispered. Justin set the phone down slowly. "He may not have. Could be coincidence." "Could be," I said. "But it isn't, is it?" Justin looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned the phone face down on the table. "Brisley, I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said. His voice had dropped low, the way voices do when the conversation becomes serious in a way that cannot be undone. "What you've shown me, if it is what it looks like, this is not a small thing. This is not a divorce case with some hidden assets and a cheating husband. This goes beyond that. Significantly beyond that." "How far beyond?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. He exhaled. "The ledger entries, the cash movement references, the language in those messages about routes and shipments and documentation. These are patterns. Serious ones. The kind that intelligence agencies and financial crime units track." I felt the cafe around me go slightly distant. like the volume of the world had been turned down. Are you saying he's? I'm saying, Justin interrupted gently, that you need to be very, very careful about your next move. Because if he is what these documents suggest, then he is also the kind of man who protects himself. Aggressively. That word, aggressively, sat between us on the table like something with weight. I drove home that evening with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel, which surprised me. Inside, I was unraveling completely, but my hands were steady. I have thought about that many times since. I think when the fear becomes large enough, it somehow flips into a strange, focused calm, like your body decides that falling apart is simply not an option anymore. Daniel was home when I arrived. He was on a call in his office, door closed, as always. I made dinner. I set the table. I called him when it was ready, and he came out smiling, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man without a single secret in the world. We ate together, and I asked him how his day was, and he told me, and I nodded, and I even laughed once. And the whole time, underneath the table, my hand was curled around my phone in my lap, and on that phone were all the photographs I had taken, backed up now to 3 separate places that he would never find. I had learned something about myself in those last few days. I was not the simple woman he thought I was. Over the following 2 weeks, I built a system. Quietly, methodically, the way I organized lesson plans for my classroom, step by step, nothing left to chance. Justin connected me privately with a contact of his, a woman named Sarah, a former investigative journalist who now worked with a legal advocacy firm that dealt with financial crime cases. We met twice in locations I chose, places Daniel had no connection to. I shared everything with Sana, the photographs, the messages, the ledger, the names, the numbers. Sana was sharp and unshockable. She looked through everything I brought her with the focused efficiency of someone who had seen the worst of people many times before. After our second meeting, she told me that at least 3 of the names in Daniel's documents were already flagged in ongoing financial investigations. She told me the scale of what I was sitting on was significant. She also told me I needed to be careful in a way that went beyond careful. Does he have any reason to suspect you know anything? She asked. No, I said. And I believed it. I had been flawless. Keep it that way, she said. Do not change your behavior. Do not become distant or emotional at home. Do not contact a divorce lawyer yet. That creates a paper trail he could detect. Right now, the most important thing you can do is remain invisible. Remain invisible. In my own home, next to the man who had made me invisible to begin with. I went home and I did exactly that. But life, as I was learning, does not wait for you to be ready. On a Thursday morning, 11 days after my first meeting with Justin, I was in the kitchen when Daniel came and stood in the doorway. He had his phone in his hand and an expression on his face I had never seen before. Not anger. Something more controlled than anger. Something colder. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking. And then he said, "Someone has been asking questions about me. Someone close." I kept my eyes on the stove. "Really?" I said. "What kind of questions?" He didn't answer immediately. I could feel his eyes on the back of my neck like a physical pressure. "The kind," he said finally, "that could get someone hurt." I turned around and looked at him directly, and I made myself hold his gaze without flinching, without blinking, without letting a single one of the 1,000 things I was feeling cross my face. "That sounds serious," I said calmly. "Do you know who it is?" He looked at me for 3 long seconds. And then he smiled. And somehow, that smile was the most frightening thing I had ever seen in my life. That smile never left my mind. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not during the days that followed when Daniel returned to his usual warmth and charm as if that moment in the kitchen had never happened. He brought me flowers on Friday. He suggested we visit my parents on Sunday. He held my hand during dinner and talked about taking a trip together in the spring. And every single time, I smiled back, because I had made a decision. I was done being invisible. I was done being careful. I was done waiting for the perfect moment while living inside a beautiful lie with a dangerous man who had looked me in the eyes and chosen me not for love but for cover. I was going to finish this on my terms before he finished it on his. I called Sana that Monday morning from my classroom during the lunch break, sitting in the corner with the door locked and the children's paintings on the wall around me. Little handprints in yellow and red, the kind that children make when the world still feels completely safe. I think he's suspicious, I told her. I don't know how much time I have. Sana was quiet for a moment. Then, are you ready to move? I looked at the little handprints on the wall. Yes, I said. What happened in the next 72 hours was something I have gone over in my mind so many times that it feels almost cinematic now, like it happened to someone else, like I watched it from above. But it happened to me. Every second of it. Sana had connections I hadn't fully understood until those final days. Through her legal advocacy firm, the information I had gathered had already been quietly, carefully shared with the right people. A financial crimes investigative unit that had apparently been building a case against a network of individuals for over 2 years. Daniel's name, it turned out, was not unknown to them. What I had provided, the ledger, the photographs, the documented message threads, was not the beginning of a case. It was the final piece of one. On Tuesday evening, I packed a bag. Not an obvious bag, not a suitcase, nothing that would be noticed. Just my school tote with a change of clothes, my important documents, my mother's phone number written on paper in case my phone was taken, and a small envelope of cash I had been setting aside in tiny amounts for 3 weeks, hidden inside a tampon box in my bathroom cabinet. The one place I was absolutely certain Daniel would never look. I told him I was going to my parents' place Wednesday morning to help my mother with some errands. He kissed me on the forehead and told me to send his salam to her. I walked out of that penthouse with my school bag on my shoulder and my keys in my hand, the little painted keychain, the one my students had made me, still digging softly into my palm. I did not look back. I drove to my parents' house, and I sat with my mother in her kitchen, and I drank tea, and I let her talk about ordinary things, my nephew's school results, a wedding in the family, a recipe she wanted to try. I sat in the warmth of that kitchen, and I felt something slowly release in my chest, like a fist that had been clenched for months finally opening. That evening, I told my parents everything. I have replayed that conversation many times too, my father's face going through shock, then grief, then a quiet, terrible fury. My mother's hand shaking as she held mine. The way my father stood up from his chair and walked to the window and stood there with his back to us for a long time without speaking. When he turned around, his eyes were wet, but his voice was completely steady. "You are here," he said. "That is all that matters now. You are here, and you are safe." At 7:45 the following morning, Daniel Raza was arrested. He was taken from the penthouse by a team of officers while apparently still in his morning routine, half-dressed, coffee in hand, completely blindsided. I was told later that he had asked for his lawyer immediately and said nothing beyond that. Controlled until the very end. That was Daniel. Even in handcuffs, performing composure. The charges were extensive. Money laundering on a significant scale. Facilitation of illegal commodity movement across borders. Falsification of business documentation. Bribery of public officials. The investigation that had been running quietly for 2 years, combined with the evidence I had provided, was apparently enough to move decisively and fast. Jennifer, it turned out, was not merely a lover. She was an operational partner, the one who managed the communication channels and the logistics of the network on the ground. She was picked up the same morning from an apartment across the city, an apartment that I later learned Daniel had been quietly paying for years. I sat in my parents' living room and watched the news coverage on my father's old television, the one he'd had since I was a child, and I felt so many things simultaneously that they canceled each other out into a kind of extraordinary stillness. Grief and relief, rage and exhaustion, the particular devastation of losing something you loved deeply while simultaneously knowing it was never real. I grieved the marriage I thought I had. I grieved the man I believed he was. Those feelings were real even if he wasn't. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. I kept nothing of his. No money, no assets, no jewelry. I wanted no thread connecting me to what he had built. I went back to my small flat, my used car, my classroom full of 8-year-olds who needed someone to believe in them. On my first day back after everything, a little girl named Hira ran up to me at the classroom door and hugged me around the waist and said, "Miss, we missed you so much." I held on to her for a moment longer than usual, because sometimes the smallest, most honest things are the only ones that put you back together. I had walked into a life that glittered and discovered it was hollow. I had been chosen for my simplicity, and I had used that simplicity as my greatest weapon. I had lost a husband and found myself, and I will tell you honestly, standing on the other side of all of it now, that is not a bad trait.